Felly wir, mae'n noson wlyb ac Gwlan y ddafad fynydd Gymraeg, so ni eisiau heno i gadw fi'n gynnas ac i cadw'r glaw mae ffwrdd oddi wrtha fi. Ac mae dda'n gweld gwynebau cyfarwydd ac ambell i wyneb newydd. Mae hwn yn drydydd webinar, y trydydd nos lun rwan, lle da ni'n dod at ei gilydd i drafod ac i ddysgu mwy am y defnydd, y ffeibr, y gwlan defaid da ni wrth gwrs yn sôn amdano fo o dan banner arloesi Gwynedd wledig. Felly mae'r webinar cyntaf wedi cael ei gynnal, lle gafon ni gyflwyniad gan Jennifer Hunter o Fern Hill Farm o Gwlad yr Haf. Wedyn mi gafon ni'r ail webinar wythnos dwytha, lle oedd y pwyslais ar brofiad ffermwyr yn ychwanegu gwerth i gnu ac i gwlan oedden nhw'n gneifio ar y ffarm. A mi glwson ni am ymdrechion Elbe Jones i ddatblygu gwlan Gwynedd a Môn. Ac wedyn mi glwson ni hanes y teulu Henry, lle nath brawd y chwaer Sarah a Joe, a gwraig Joe, Rachel, ymuno fo ni i roi hanes Rayburn World. A lot o bethau da ni wedi ddysgu fanna o'r ddwy webinar cyntaf. A heno yma, mae genna ni line-up arbennig o gry heno yma, sy'n mynd i rhoi blas i ni o waith arloesol sydd yn digwydd o ran datblygu'r gadwyn gyflenwi, dadansoddi a profi gwlan ac hefyd yn y maes ymchwil. A beth sydd yn galondid i weld ydy fod y tri sydd yn ymuno efo ni heno yma i gyd yn byw ac yn gweithio yng Ngogledd Cymru, a sydd dweud fod y tri yn trio llawer eu hamser yng Ngwynedd. Mae Courtney a Graham yn gweithio yma yng Ngwynedd, a dwi'n gwybod fod Gareth yn trio lot o'i amser yma yng Ngwynedd, felly mae gennym ni'r arbenigedd yma ar y stepan drws ni. Mae gen i'n bach o nodyn trist i gydnabod ar y cychwyn y webinar. Fel da chi'n gwybod, mae y gyfres wedi drefnu fel rhan o arloesi Gwynedd wledig ac yn gyrru'r agenda ymlaen ac yn adnabod blaenoriaethau arloesi Gwynedd wledig. Mae yna grŵp yn dod at ei gilydd yn cynrychioli'r gymuned ac enw'r grŵp yma ydy'r LAG, y Local Action Group, neu'r grŵp gweithredu lleol. A gafon ni newyddion trist dros y penwythnos gyda marwolaeth un aelod o'r LAG ac aelod ymroddedig tu hwn sef David Ingham o Dinas Dinlla. Oedd o'n ffarmwr ac yn arloeswr gwledig. Ac mi oedd David yn benodol yn angerddol dros ben dros Gwlan. A dwi'n gwybod fod o'n bod yn siarad ar y LAG yn trio gwthio'r agenda i edrych sut fydda modd ychwanegu gwerth i'r Gwlan, ac oedd o'n sicr bod yn teimlo nad oedden ni ddim yn llawn cyrraedd potensial. Ond nath o chwarae rhan blaenllawd i gwir mewn trio cael adnoddau i edrych ymhellach i fewn i'r Gwlan. Felly dwi'n siŵr sa pawb yn ymuno efo fi ac yn ymestyn cydymdeimlad efo teulu a ffrindiau David, a mi fydd 'na fwlch mawr ar Reolwr. Felly, symudwn ni ymlaen felly efo'r siaradwyr heno yma, ac mae gennym ni Gareth Jones, Reolwr marchnata cynhyrchwyr o'r British World yn ymuno efo ni heno yma. Wedyn mae gennym ni Dr Courtney Pye yn Reolwr Gyfarwyddwraig, awdurdod profi Gwlan y WTA yn Cibyn Nghaernarfon, ac hefyd Dr Graham Ormondroyd, sef pennaeth ymchwil defnyddiau o'r Ganolfan BioGyfansoddion ym Mhrifysgol Bangor. Felly, da ni falch iawn o gallu croesawu'r tri efo ni heno. Fel fyddai'n neud bob tro, dwi eisiau annog chi ddefnyddio'r fforwm chat sydd ar gael drwy Zoom, ac yn y seminar neu'r webinar sydd wedi bod, mae yna drafodaeth yn mynd ymlaen tra fod y siaradwyr yn siarad, a da ni eisiau gweld hynny, mae modd i chi rwydweithio. Ac be fyddwn ni hoffi chi wneud rwan ydy pawb sydd efo keyboard neu allweddau'r i nodi'ch enw chi, o lle ydych chi'n ymuno efo ni heno i ni gael rhyw fath o ddealltwriaeth daearyddol, a dwi'n sylweddoli fyna ambell un ond chi wedi bod yn yr tri webinar hyd yma, lle ydych chi'n gwybod y broses efallai rwan, ac hefyd cadarnhewch beth yw'ch prif diddordeb chi efo Gwlan. Felly, os chi'n cystal roed hwnna ar y chat, eich enw, o lle ydych chi'n ymuno efo ni heno yma, ac be ydy'ch diddordeb chi efo Gwlan. Wedyn fel ddedodd Elin, os ydych chi'n cyfrannu, os ydych chi'n cystal rhaid mute os gwelwch yn dda, da ni'n eisiau Coronation Street yn y cefndir, neu da ni'n eisiau clywed I'm a Celebrity sydd ymlaen, i gael ni ddal fyny fo hwnnw nes ymlaen yn fanna. Ac os ydych chi yn teimlo gyffyrddus, rhowch eich camera ymlaen. Ond da ni deall hefyd, fel mae Jessica wedi nodi reit ar y dechrau, mae hi yn multitaskio yn y cefndir, felly mae'n gwrando ar hwn, felly fydda yn addas sydd i roed y fideo, dwi'n dall wrach yn yr eraill yn yr un sefyllfa. Ond os ydych chi gallu roed y fideo, rhowch ymlaen, mae'n neis cael gweld gwynebau pobl, enwedig pryd da ni'n cymdeithasu cynlliad ar hyn o bryd. Felly, dwi'n gweld y chat yn cychwyn biwogi, rhowch eich enw o lle ydych chi'n ymuno fyny heno yma, ac beth i'ch diddordeb chi mewn Gwlan. Felly, gweld Steve Briggs yn barod, ac fel ydych chi'n gweld, ydy pawb ddim o Wynedd o bellffordd. Mae Steve yn ymuno fyny o Toxeter, yn Sir Stafford, mae Elwyn wedyn o Lanbryn Mair, ac felly parhewch i lenwi'r chat os gwelwch o dda. Dwi'n gwybod i pawb efallai ddim efo'r keyboard, dwi'n cofio efo Hugh yn nodi hynny yn y webinar cyntaf fod o'n gallu teipio. Ond mae Hugh Evans yn ymuno ni o Dolgellas, dwi'n cofio, ac yn ffarmio. Iawn, mi wna i sôn mwy am y webinar sydd wythnos nesaf, y webinar ola, reit ar ddiwedd y sesiwn heno yma, ac da ni anelu i orffan hanner awr wedi 8. Mae'r tri o'r cyfranwyr efo ni i gyd wedi cael yr un brief, sef i drafod ei gwaith, a'i sylwadau, a'i syniadau am chwarter awr. Mi fyddai'n oedi am bach i jyst erbyn cwestiynau o ran clariffio unrhyw beth ydych chi isio, ond dwi'n awyddus i adael y drafodaeth agorad yn y diwedd o tua 8 ymlaen. Felly dyna'r bwriad heno yma. Felly, na i ymestyn gwahoddiad felly Gareth i gychwyn cyflwyniadau efo gyflwyniad o am y chwarter awr nesaf, a wedyn awn ni drosodd at Courtney a wedyn Graham. Felly, Gareth, os ti hapus i fentro fo'r dechnoleg, a mi ddylia ti fod yn gallu rhannu dy sgrin efo ni.
Iawn. Can everyone see the screen? Iawn?
Jumpio mlaen, weld y gred, Gareth, ar y sgrin.
Iawn, okay, na i gochwyn. So, noswaith dda, good evening everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to come and present at this evening's webinar. And it's for someone who's worked in the wool industry for a number of years, it's very encouraging to see the enthusiasm and interest that we're seeing in Wales in particular, especially with the Leoli Gwynedd. Like I said, I'm delighted to be here this evening to give you the presentation. So just to give you a brief introduction, I'm Gareth Jones from Denby. My full name is actually Gareth Wyn Jones. Apologies in advance if you're disappointing expecting to see another Gareth Wyn Jones, but I do class myself as the second most popular Gareth Wyn Jones after the infamous Gareth from Llanfairfechan. I've clocked up 26 years working for British Wool. I started back in 1990 at their wool grading depot here in Denby, which has since closed. In 2004, I left British Wool and took up a position as County Executive Officer with the Farmers Union of Wales, covering the 4 North East Wales counties. After 4 very interesting...
No, man, this is Pat.
Sorry? Okay. After 4 very interesting years with the FEW, which included the foot and mouth outbreak in 2007 and the blue tongue disease outbreak as well, I returned back to British Wool in 2008 as producer communications manager. And over the course of the last 12 years since I returned to British Wool, the role has evolved into the role it is now, which is as head of producer marketing. And that role is responsible for all the farmer-facing activity of British Wool. And there's a team of 7 of us involved in all different aspects of the farmer-facing activity. So this includes marketing and communication. It's vitally important that we communicate with the 35,000 wool producers who are supplying their wool through British Wool. Press, media and stakeholder engagement. Press and media in particular this year, we've never had the interest that we've seen from the press and media. It's on the back of a negative story, unfortunately, because of the returns that farmers have been receiving for their wool. But I'll talk a little bit later on about how important it is, despite it being a negative situation with the prices, that we embrace that opportunity that's been offered to us by the press and media this year. Stakeholder engagement, vitally important. Collaboration, such as what we're doing with our Gwynedd this evening. It's vitally important that we work with our stakeholders within the livestock industry, such as NFU Cymru, FEW, the NSA and the red meat bodies. Targeted sales projects. This is managing a number of specific projects which is looking at maintaining as well as increasing our market share, because the more wool that we handle as British Wool, the more cost effective and efficient we are, because we are fully funded by those 35,000 wool producers who are using the service that we provide. We're involved in a number of shows and events. Obviously this year, as a result of the COVID pandemic, all the shows have been cancelled. But in a normal year, we would attend up to about 50 agricultural shows every year. And that would range from having a trade stand at some of the bigger shows to maybe having and facilitating a fleece competition or a wool on the hoof competition at some of the smaller shows. And one of the shows that we do attend every year is Anglesey. And we have a fleece competition at Anglesey show, and it's a really good 2-day show. And what's interesting is that probably 75%, if not more, of the people that we would engage and talk with at that show are actually consumers. So the ag shows are really important for us to engage with our producers, but it also gives us an opportunity to engage and to raise awareness to the consumer about the benefits of wool. We also support a number of other events, such as the webinar this evening. Normally, we would probably give up to 60 producer presentations or attend 60 producer meetings every year, so it's an important part of what we do. We're very proud to be a farmer organisation, and we have 9 regions across the UK. Every region has a farmer-elected regional committee. So as a producer marketing team, we're responsible for managing those 9 regions. Shearing also is an important part of what we do, and British Wool is very proud to be the approved training provider for shearing in the UK. Again, as a result of the pandemic this year, we had to cancel all our shearing courses. But in a normal year, we would have roughly around 800 people that would come onto our shearing courses. And 60% of those coming on the courses are absolute beginners. So again, it's really encouraging to see the youngsters wanting to come onto the shearing courses, seeing it as an opportunity to earn income, as well as life experiences, but also to learn a very important and traditional rural skill. And then the final point there, our business over in Northern Ireland is Ulster Wool. So as a team, we're also responsible for producer marketing activity, which is basically all of the above in Northern Ireland as well. So just to recap very briefly on the role of British Wool as an organisation, we are a farmer organisation handling 25 million kilos of wool, which is roughly about 12 million fleeces every year from 35,000 UK wool producers. And the main focus of British Wool's role is to provide a high level of service in getting the wool off the farm into a network of 12 UK grading depots, and we have 3 of those in Wales, 1 in Porthmadog, 1 in Newton and 1 in Brecon. We grade every individual fleece that comes into us, because every individual fleece is unique, but by grading every fleece, we are adding value to the producer's wool. And I appreciate for those producers who are with us this evening that the returns that you're getting for the wool is very frustrating and disappointing for you. But the grading process is important because we can separate the better quality from the poorer quality, and then obviously the better quality wool would achieve a better return. All British wool is independently tested. And Courtney is with us this evening, and we'll talk about the work of WTA based in Nghaernarfon. But by testing the wool, it gives the buyers confidence in the purchases that they're making. And like I said, I'm sure that Courtney will explain a little bit more about the testing and what we test for. And then the final point there is that British wool is sold onto the global wool market, and we sell the wool through an auction. And as a result, again, of the COVID pandemic, we've moved our auctions this year to be remote online auctions. So when the market closed between March and May, although the demand had fallen off significantly, we were still able to offer British wool onto that global market because we'd moved to this remote online auction. And what's the benefit of the auction system is that it's a tried and tested method of selling produce off the farm, and wool is no exception. And by selling it through an auction, we are returning the true market value for the product back to the producer. So marketing, I've just got a couple of slides on marketing. So one of the biggest criticisms that we receive from producers is that we don't market the wool and identify new uses. And although a lot of this marketing work is not always visible to the producer, it's not actually correct, because we are working on the following three key areas, which is consumer marketing here in the UK, looking at new opportunities in the Chinese market, and also working on new product uses for wool with universities. So just taking each of those three, there's a slide on each one. So consumer marketing, we launched a new brand licensee scheme 2 years ago. This was to ensure that we are only promoting products that are British wool rich. Many products claim to be made out of British wool, but they actually aren't. So we are working with manufacturers and pushing British wool through retailers. We have display stands and points of sale material, for example, in a number of carpets and bedding retailers. And you can see on the left-hand side of the screen there, some of the brands that we are working with, such as Brinton's in the carpet sector. You've got Rest Assured and Silent Night in bedding and beds. In apparel, you've got Harris Tweed, an iconic brand, and then some of the other products, Thermofleece, which is a Cumbrian-based business producing wool insulation. So they're just some examples of the 50 different brands that we're working with across the UK as part of our new licensee scheme. We're also targeting the consumer direct on social media, directing them to British wool products and retailers, and working with those brands that you can see there. And across all our various social media platforms, we've got in excess of 100,000 followers on the likes of Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. And social media gives us an excellent opportunity to engage with the consumer and get some key messages out there. And it's been even more so this year because of the pandemic, because we obviously haven't been able to attend a number of consumer shows, for example, to have that face-to-face interaction. So social media has been one of the main forms of communication during the course of this year. So moving on to the next slide, China. So if I can just take the last point on that slide, first of all, despite some reports, there's only 25% of British wool that's currently sold into China, because there does seem to be a perception that there's a lot more. So there's only a quarter of our wool sold into that market. However, China is a very important player in that global wool market, because they're the biggest producer of wool in the world themselves. They're the biggest importer and processor of wool in the world, as well as being the biggest consumer of woolen products. So it's important for us as British Wool to be working in that significant market on the global industry. And an important thing that we did was that we opened an office in Shanghai in late 2018. The idea is to target new users of British wool and work on new product opportunities. This allows us to gain a premium for the wool over what we would receive at the auction through offering marketing activities and working with a number of different brands over in China. Having already launched the bedding range, we did sell nearly 30,000 duvets in the first year, and we are also working on clothing such as suits and knitwear, rugs and interiors, and identifying other partners in that important market over in China. But like I said, it's very important to recognise that only a quarter of our wool is sold into that market. 50% of our wool remains here in the UK. The final slide on marketing, we are working with 2 UK universities on new blue sky product development projects. Although this is not an immediate solution to the current situation that we find ourselves in, over time, this should create new demand and in turn drive prices upwards. These are very much longer term projects, and some may take a little time to come to market, but it is a very important part of our marketing strategy to be working with the two universities. But this should introduce new demand for British wool from potentially a new set of users in the UK and also further afield. Some of the work that we're working with universities is commercially sensitive, so we have had to sign some non-disclosure agreements, so we can't really talk in any great detail about these projects. But as I say, you know, we're fully committed to working with the two universities, and let's hope as the project develops that we do find some new and exciting uses for British wool. So the final couple of slides is very much on where we are at the moment, and obviously the opportunities that we can identify hopefully moving forward. So despite the current challenges facing the sector as a result of the pandemic, one thing this year is that wool has never generated the press and media interest it has done in recent months. And although, as I said earlier on, it's very much on the back of a negative story, which is the returns farmers are receiving for their wool, we should ensure that we embrace this media interest and use it as an opportunity to raise awareness amongst consumers on the environmentally friendly credentials and benefits of wool. So as British Wool, we've participated in over 30 live radio interviews in the last few months and 7 TV programmes, which is, it might not seem a lot, but it's a lot more than what we would normally do. But the one key thing that we need to see the demand for British wool increasing, as well as the price and the return to farmer, is that we need to raise awareness with the consumer so that they make that lifestyle choice around wool. And if they're going to make that lifestyle choice, that then would hopefully mean there's a greater demand, obviously, for British wool and British wool products. And that would hopefully then mean there's more people buying in the auction, increased competition, and then ultimately then, obviously, the return to the farmer increases. The current situation has also raised awareness politically across all 4 devolved governments. We continue to lobby politicians to ensure their long-term support of the industry and of the wool sector. And it's particularly encouraging, as being a very proud Welshman, to see the interest that we've seen from Welsh government in the last few months. One sort of development is that the Director of Marketing and myself, we met up with 2 senior officials from Welsh Government's procurement team a couple of weeks ago. It was a really positive meeting, and there will be a follow-up meeting, and we're just gathering some information for them on more information on the wool supply chain. But Welsh Government are committed to considering using more Welsh wool, obviously, when they're looking at their estates. So, you know, that's really encouraging and something that's come on the back of the situation we find ourselves in. Some other regional and local opportunities in the last 18 months, we've seen much more interest in adding value to wool, certainly here in Wales, and looking at new opportunities, such as the Gwynedd reports that Jen and Gwynedd were working on, Geraint were working on in March 2019. British Wool, we welcome this interest and the enthusiasm, and earlier this year we became members of the Welsh Wool and Textile Group, which was a new group that was established by Welsh Government. It was established pre-COVID. We had our first meeting in February, which was a face-to-face meeting, and there was a lot of enthusiasm in the room. There was about 40 odd people in the room, and it was drawing on a wide range of knowledge and expertise within the sector here in Wales. We've had 2 meetings. We had one face-to-face, as I say, and then we've had a second meeting on Zoom. The aim of this group is to pull together a Welsh wool strategy, and we have our 3rd meeting in a couple of weeks' time. So it's really encouraging to see the Welsh Wool and Textile Group, you know, working together and hopefully identifying some exciting new opportunities here in Wales. We've also previously worked with the Cambrian Mountains Wool Initiative, sourcing wool produced within the Cambrian Mountains catchment in Wales for them to produce a knitting yarn. And we've also worked and supported previous feasibility studies, such as the one by Cadwyn Clwyd that was produced about 10 years ago, and also the wool seminars, and they were roughly about 10 years ago as well, as part of the Textiles Technologies project that was held by colleague Sir Gar. So the final slide that I've got as part of my presentation is that historically there has been a perception that British Wool is not always interested in working on small more local-based projects. So the one key message I want to give out this evening is that come and speak to us. Any idea that you've got, any product idea, any business idea involving wool, come and speak to us. We're happy to listen, and we're happy to also support in any way that we can. And I've just explained some examples. Cambrian Mountains is an example of them coming to us. We had the conversation and we were able to source the wool that they needed, and we were able to sort of support them, in terms of the wool supply chain as well. But by coming to talk to us and using the knowledge that we have, British Wool is able to offer extensive knowledge and expertise on wool types and qualities. We're able to give you advice on if you've got a specific product that you want to develop. We can tell you about what wool type and qualities is best suited for that, because different types and qualities of wool is better suited for different types of products. We also have knowledge as well as contacts throughout the wool supply chain. I know that you've touched on this in your previous webinars, as well as within the Gwynedd report, and the challenges in terms of wool processing, which is very much volume driven. But we have got the knowledge and the contacts, and we can put you in touch with people within the supply chain to talk about the products that you want to produce, and obviously what that process would be. There are opportunities to also source a variety of wool types from specific geographical areas. For example, if you had a business opportunity and you were looking for producing wool, using wool from Wales, or maybe even more local within Wales, such as the Cambrian Mountains, then come and have a conversation with us, and let's see whether we can supply you with the wool that you need, but specifically from a geographical area that you might need it as well. And then the final point there is that there is a much more flexible buying approach now. So if you're interested in using British or Welsh wool, again, come and talk to us. There is a facility to buy through the auction that was established 2 years ago, which is the agency buyer. And the agency buyer is in the auction bidding and buying wool on behalf of some smaller users. But if you're literally only looking for a few hundred kilos of a specific type, again, come and talk to us. We are more flexible in terms of how we can sell the wool and support your business. So I think that's the final slide. So thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn. More than happy to take any questions or comments, whether it's at the end of this or whether it's after the other two presentations. So diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch Gareth. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much. Dwi'n awyddus I gadw'r momentum a'r dwyster, di gwir, y cyflwyniad, drwy beidio oedi gormod. Felly dwi'n mynd am addasu'n bach, ac os oes gan rywun gwestiwn uniongyrchol I Gareth, eisiau rhagor o eglurhad neu I glarifio ryw bwynt mae Gareth I codi oedd o'n dod drosodd I mi fel cyflwyniad arbennig o glir, diolch yn fawr Gareth. Yna, sa'ch chi'n cystal a wneud hynny ar y chat, os gwelwch yn dda. Defnyddio ni'r fforwm chat i'w potensial hyn yma. Felly, Gareth, sa ti'n meindio cadw llygad rhag gofyn a gwestiwn perthnasol I dy gyflwyniad di ar y chat, ond os allwn ni gadw'r cwestiynau cyffredinol teg at yr diwedd y sesiwn hyn yma, sa hynna dwi'n meddwl yn gweithio, dwi'n awyddus fod ni'n cynnal y momentum, achos sydyn iawn mae amser yn mynd di gwir. Felly, mi nawn ni siŵr bod pawb yn cael cyfle holi cwestiynau yn y diwedd. Felly, defnyddiwch y chat, mae yna i'w defnyddio. Mae modd gyrru cwestiwn yn benodol I Gareth neu gwneud I bawb. O ddewis, os ydyn ni'n licio gweld y cwestiynau I bawb, o fod ni'n gweld yr sgwrsiau sy'n mynd ymlaen. Iawn, o'n I ymlaen i'r ail gyflwyniad efo Courtney Pye. So Courtney, would you be as kind as to go through your presentation, and thank you, Gareth, for keeping it brief, and likewise, Courtney will do the same, I'm sure, from the World Testing Authority. So over to you, Courtney.
Okay, thank you again. Can you all see my presentation?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay, and you can hear me okay?
Yeah, and I think Eileen can as well. Can you, Eileen? Yeah, I think
good.
Looks good.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. The one thing I've always noticed whenever I've spoken to producers or farmers in the area, the one thing that always strikes me is that not many know that we actually exist and that there's a wool testing laboratory on their doorstep. So just to give you a little bit of background information about myself, my name is Courtney Pye and I'm the Managing Director of Wool Testing Authority Europe. So the laboratory was set up in 2004 and we are the only accredited test house in the Northern Hemisphere. So we're located on the Kibbin Industrial Estate just outside of Nghaernarfon. And we are, like I say, the only accredited test house in the Northern Hemisphere. And we are one of only 11 worldwide. So you can imagine the wool testing industry is dominated by the Southern Hemisphere. So Australia has 2 test houses. There's one in New Zealand, there's one in South Africa, and there's a handful of smaller labs throughout South America. So that's a photograph there of our unit on the industrial estate. Not particularly big, but we must test the equivalent of about maybe about 80 million kilos of wool annually. So that comes in from the UK and Europe. Now, when I say 80 million kilos, we don't deal with 80 million kilos. We test cord samples taken out of wool lots, but still a significant amount of wool. So when I say licensing and accreditation, what do I mean by that? So to be able to test wool shipments, we have to hold an IWTO license. The IWTO is the International Wool and Textile Organization, and they oversee the wool industry globally. So from the producer right through to the end product. And testing and test houses sit within that supply chain. And to be able to certify wool shipments, we have to hold an IWTO license. So we have a license. Our number is 0017. In order to gain that license, we have to prove our technical competence. So we do that through our accreditation to the technical standard ISO 17025. 17025 can be regarded as the gold standard for technical competence. So it's almost like a blueprint for how to run your business from a technical point of view, and it covers everything except finances. So it covers impartiality, confidentiality, quality control, the testing process itself, complaints and how they are handled, personnel, training, and it's key. So without that, we wouldn't have our IWTO license. So those two go hand in hand. In order to gain the 17025 accreditation, we also have to show that we're members of round trials. So Wool Testing Authority are members of 2 round trials internationally. And the idea here is that participating laboratories test common samples, and then we can compare how we perform compared to other laboratories. So the 4 logos that you can see there on the screen are key to the business, and they underpin and form the foundation of our business. So what about the testing process itself? Well, the testing process begins with sampling. So the first thing we need to do is get the samples out of the bales. We have to be in control of that sampling process. If we allowed merchants to take their own samples, it would be chaos, and we certainly couldn't provide an impartial testing service. So we have to be in control of that process, governed by the IWTO and 17025. And we've got a network of sampling agents located throughout Europe. So the map there you can see, we're basically throughout Europe, so north, south, east. We've got a small office up in Bradford with sampling agents up there. We've got sampling agents in Ireland. And the idea is that if a merchant wants to have their wool tested, then they get in touch with their local sampling agent and they will go and test the wool and then send the sample to us for testing. So then there's the testing process itself. So I mean, I could have included photographs here of the laboratory, but without actually seeing it, I don't think it would have brought much to the presentation. So I'll talk about the test methods, but once all this is over with COVID-19, you know, anyone's welcome to come to the laboratory anytime for a tour. I think you would find it interesting. So IWTO testing leads to guaranteed results and secure certification. So we test according to IWTO test methods. And that's a list there of the 4 common test methods that tend to get asked for. So we can test to IWTO 19. So that's the determination of wool base and vegetable matter of raw wool. So wool base is just how much clean wool fibre is in a shipment. So once you've taken out all the impurities, mainly grease and vegetable matter, we can tell the merchant how much of their shipment is clean wool fibre, because at the end of the day, the buyer only wants to pay for the wool. We can determine mean fibre diameter using 2 methods. So we've got IWTO 28, which is mean fibre diameter using the airflow method, and IWTO 12, which is determination of mean fibre diameter, again using laser scan. And we can also measure the colour of raw wool, so that's IWTO 56. And these test methods are basically standards for how to test samples. The testing process has to be standardised, that is key. If I test a sample here in Wales, if I send that same sample to a lab in Australia or New Zealand and they test, if they're testing according to these IWTO test methods, they should get the same result within a certain tolerance. So that's the idea of the standardisation. So I like to think of the business in this form, a pyramid. So if you think of Wool Testing Authority being represented by the logo, so that's the business. And then we've got the testing process. So in the middle there, you can see the sampler taking the samples out of the bales, testing the cord samples and then issuing a test certificate. This is all underpinned by the accreditations that we hold. So without these accreditations, there is no business basically. You start to take away these logos underneath. So the IRT, the UCAS accreditation, the IWTO license, the whole thing starts to fall apart, and we invest significant amounts of time and significant amounts of funds into maintaining these accreditations. So this is the final product, an IWTO test certificate. So, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. This is for a British wool lot, grade 487. So that came into the laboratory, we tested it, and this is the test certificate that was issued for that lot. The layout of these certificates is not random. This is also governed by the IWTO, so there's certain things that have to be on there that make it an IWTO certificate. So the wording, IWTO test certificate. The authorisation at the bottom, so it has to have 2 signatures. So there's mine and Chris Prescott's, who's the sampling manager located up in Bradford. Our IWTO stamp is on there, and our own stamp of authenticity is on there. And then you have the test result itself in the middle. So when I got the brief for this presentation, I was asked to give half the time talking about what we do. So that's the earlier part of the presentation, what I've just finished. I mean, and I was also asked to talk about adding value to wool. Now, I've got to stress that this is just my own personal opinion. The very nature of what we do, we have to be independent, so we don't get involved in the sales transaction. So this is just through my experience of working with wool and what I believe can be done to add value to wool. So first of all, the very nature of what we do brings value to wool. Without a testing service, it would be very difficult to sell these wool lots on an open market. In the past, a lot of trade was done on gentlemen's agreements, subjective analysis. We don't have to worry too much about that anymore because we've got the technology in place to be able to test the physical properties of wool very, very accurately. And there's a whole industry dedicated to it. So these certificates are crucial. And I know that a lot of the time getting the wool even into countries, so especially China, which is what Gareth talked about in his presentation, they won't let wool shipments in if it isn't accompanied with an IWTO test certificate. So the very nature of what we do brings value to wool, and testing of wool lots must continue if this is going to carry on. I mean, this goes for wool within the UK and also wool around Europe, and it forms part of the LC process. So the letters of credit to get wool in, and these certificates can almost be seen as like a check to be able to, for the merchants to be able to cash and make purchases on the wool. So this slide here, I was trying to think, how can I talk about the last 18 months of the wool industry quickly? And the only way I could think was to just basically have a slide that just shows what the last 18 months have been like. So before COVID-19, which obviously has had a devastating impact on the global economies and the wool industry, wool has not been having an easy time. So even before COVID-19, the main driver for the decrease in demand for wool has been the ongoing trade war between China and America. So everyone's heard the story. President Trump came in and he slapped a load of tariffs on everything, and wool was not spared. So there was a vast decrease in exports into the US from China. And as a result of that, inevitably the demand for wool declined. And then you've got Brexit. I mean, I don't want to get into a huge political debate, but you know, who knows what's going to happen with Brexit, deal or no deal. I mean, we're going to find out in the next few weeks, but all this has added to the uncertainty. Ethical impact of, you know, PETA with their campaign against the use of wool. This has all had an impact on the demand for wool. And then obviously we've had COVID-19. I mean, who would have known 12 months ago that we would be living our lives the way that we're living them at the moment? So sometimes we do just have to accept that we just don't have control over these things. I think things might get better with the result of the presidential election. I think hopefully, depending on Joe Biden's take on tariffs, perhaps things will get better. I don't know. Another thing to also consider is changes in fashion. So wool will naturally fall in and out of favour, and this is mainly governed by the fashion houses and what they say is fashionable at the time. So I think it was 2014, 2015, coarse wool types were doing particularly well. And this was partly driven by a fashion in China for double-faced fabrics. And the demand for wool went through the roof. But obviously these fashions don't last forever, and that fashion ended. So hopefully there will be new fashion trends, but they come and go. So this next slide, I do truly say this quite positively. I do believe that wool's revival is coming. I mean, wool is the ultimate natural, sustainable fibre. I mean, what's not to love about wool? I mean, I've listed 6 things there, 6 reasons there. I mean, wool ticks all of the ecological boxes. And you could probably list another 10. You know, I think with the Planet Earth and the David Attenborough effect, after he did that one documentary, I do truly believe that wool's day is coming. I mean, it might take 2 years, it might take 10 years, but I think we will get there with wool. And I think the only thing that the industry can do is just educate. We just have to keep pushing the message for the use of wool. I mean, if you have a look at those 2 pictures there, if you had to put those images in front of any child, I mean, they would always pick the image of the sheep. And I don't think wool is the total solution, but it's certainly a contribution. And I think people are coming round to the idea more. But the value of wool depends predominantly on its final use. The British wool clip is not known for its fineness, unlike Australian merino, but it is the best wool in the world for making carpets, interior textiles, and other soft furnishings. I mean, I've chosen those 3 images there of the hotel and the cruise liner and the casino because they are the 3 industries that have been impacted the most by COVID-19. But once we get through these next 12 months, let's say, there will be a boom in these industries, and the wool industry can only benefit from that. The first thing that these places are probably going to want to do is refurbish, ready for all the new customers that want to come and have a holiday. And I think that the next 12 to 18 months, we will see definite pick up in demand for wool. I think it's inevitable. You know, we've all been locked down. We can't go on holiday. I think the first thing a lot of people are going to want to do is do that very thing, go on holiday. We're very lucky in this country that we have an infrastructure, the infrastructure that we do have through British Wool. British Wool will collect your wool, you can take it into your depots, it's graded, it's sorted, and it's tested, and then it's sold. We get wool from all over Europe, and particularly Hungarian wool, Eastern European wool. I think we test maybe about 1 million kilos of that a year. Beautiful merino wool, maybe 20 to 25 micron, but the quality of it's terrible because there's no infrastructure for them to be able to sell their wool, and it impacts the quality, and it certainly impacts the value of the wool. So we are lucky to have the infrastructure that we have to be able to sell the wool, because I know that not all countries have the luxury of having that infrastructure. But ultimately, it's all about micron. So any potential to reduce the micron of the clip will always bring more value to the wool. Now, I know this isn't for everybody, you know, the hill and the mountain breeds particularly. Why would you want to reduce the micron? The very fact that it's coarse wool makes it very good for making carpets. But for the finer breeds, certainly, you know, if there would be some potential to reduce the micron or begin to work on looking at that. I mean, we don't have to worry about the infrastructure for selling wool, that's already there. So we could start looking at the actual flock itself. So there's many ways that this can be done. So breeding programs, introducing genes from finer breeds, flock management, nutritional management, individual fleece testing, so monitoring micron of individual animals and to benefit the overall micron of the flock. There's obviously 4 main questions that this raises. Incentives to do it. Are there any incentives? Interest. Are the breeders and producers interested in doing this? The cost, because you can imagine it's not going to be cheap. And the time. It's going to take a long time to bring these changes in. But, you know, these are things that can be done. Having conversations, I mean, I've used the Australian flag there as an example, but having conversations with the merino breeders, talking to them about what they do, and seeing, you know, if we can make changes in that respect. So that's the Wool Testing Authority Europe and what we do and my ideas. So if there's any questions, either now or at the end of the presentations, then feel free.
Excellent. Diolch o galon. Thank you, Courtney. Another full of information and intense presentation there, and highlighting the resource we've got on the doorstep here in Gwynedd, but more importantly, the invitation to work and form bridges with producers and other collaborators. Great. What I'll do, Courtney, is delay questions, general questions, till the end, because it's something I should have been expecting. Of course, time is something we need to manage, but I still feel that we're getting good information. And let's get Graham's presentation going, and then we'll open the floor. Courtney, you might want to have a look on the chat, because I think one specific question has come for your attention from Mike.
Okay.
Felly, diolch yn fawr. We'll come back to you, Courtney, shortly, and Gareth. And do continue to use the chat. Parhewch I ddefnyddio'r chat. Dwi'n gweld ambell i gwestiynau, a gwaith ni ddefnyddio mantais y dechnoleg Zoom fel fyna drafodaeth mynd ymlaen. Os ni mewn stafell, fysa ni ddim wrach yn siarad efo'r person drws nesaf, ddim eisiau gwneud sŵn. Ond mi fedra ni gael rhyw chats bach ar y chat, tra hefyd dal I wylio'r cyflwyniad. Felly, awn ni syth ymlaen I gyflwyniad Graham. So we'll go over straight now to Graham's presentation. Very similar brief in terms of time and so that we can, and also in terms of content, so we understand what's going on at the Biocomposite Centre. And it's good to be able to not meet, but spend time rather with Graham. We have spent time together in lectures many years ago. And obviously Graham listened to the lectures and I didn't. So Graham is joining us tonight, and I'm really looking forward for what is going to be a short presentation, but at least will give us a flavour of what Graham has been up to and his colleagues in Bangor. So over to you, Graham, and then we'll open up to questions. Diolch o galon chi gyd.
Great, thank you so much. Just a very quick introduction to myself. My name's Graham Ormondroyd. I actually spent my life, my formative years around wool. Both my parents, my mother and my father's families were involved in the wool trade and the textile trade in Bradford, so I'm a Bradford boy born and bred. I did deviate slightly only by one letter and moved for a lot of the time into wood and timber. But thankfully through some work that I've done with several wool companies and companies that are interested in using wool in unique ways or different ways to textiles, but also now working with British wool, I've been able to go back to my roots, as it were. So we've talked about wool for textiles, and as Courtney said at the end of her presentation, British wool is fantastic for carpets, and also tweed. Tweed is a British institution that we have, and it is focused on the use of high quality but coarse wool. When the IWTO are looking at again, as Courtney said, when the IWTO are looking at their textiles, they have several properties that they look at, and I'm not going to name them all because we don't have time, but they're listed out there. Those properties are fantastic for textiles, absolutely brilliant. But for someone that wants to make a novel product, whether it be a composite or an insulation product, which we'll come on to talking about these more, these mean absolutely nothing. And I've called this slide the crux of the problem because basically, as a material scientist and someone that wants to make composites, I absolutely know nothing about wool. And the information that I need to design a composite or to put into a computer program to make a product is not out there at the moment. There are other problems as well. Now, I'm talking to the converted here, and you'll already know that there's more than 1,000 recognised breeds of sheep in the world and over 60 native breeds registered here in the UK alone. When wool's traded, as Courtney's already talked about and Gareth talked about earlier, it's classed into these classes that I've listed here, right through from fine wool through to hill and mountain, and then naturally coloured wool. And these classes are based on their use in the textile industry, and as you guys will know, the price varies dramatically from rather expensive, very lovely merino wool from Australia, right down to mountain wool from perhaps here in the upper mountains of North Wales. Now, wool, it's a complex material, and wool from each species is very unique. And that's whether it be the cuticle, the scaling on the wool, the microfibrils within the wool and how they're made, the amount of cortical cells in the wool. Again, that's very unique to each breed of sheep and to each species. Now, we know already what breeds are good for what textile, and we've spoken about that already. But when we're moving into wanting to make non-textile products, whether it be an insulation for construction, whether it be an insulation for packaging, or whether it be a composite, and for composite applications we'll talk about later, we don't necessarily know whether the high quality wool for textiles is actually that good for making those products. Well, we do, because we've now done the work, and that's kind of what I want to talk to you a bit about this evening. About the fact that perhaps what we generally know as the highest quality of wool is not necessarily the highest quality of wool for making these products. So I just want to take a bit of a deep dive into wool insulation, because it is a product, it's out there. We even had our own North Wales producer of wool insulation for a while. Unfortunately, they've gone now, and they've moved their production down to the south of England. And it is a product. But once again, when we started working with the company Black Mountain and talking to people like Thermofleece, they knew a little bit about the wool, and they knew it works as a good insulation. They even might have known that the insulation started to buffer the moisture in the atmosphere, so the humidity within buildings. But no one really understood why. So I'm a scientist and I like doing this type of work, so we started to try and understand why wool insulation was so good. We had to start somewhere, and we started with its actual insulation values. And actually, if you just take a quick look at this table, standard insulations you use in home, the stuff you get for free is fiberglass insulation and mineral wool insulation. Well, actually, if you make the product out of sheep's wool, it is as good as those two standard products. And it's actually coming out better than straw. Straw's a product that's been used for building materials for a while now, and as a great advocate here in the UK. Even loose fill cellulose insulation, a wool batten is still as good as these products. It stands up on its own. We wanted to investigate this idea about how wool buffers moisture in a building. So we use this piece of kit. It's sits in one of my labs, and I know Simon Curlin, who's on this call today. It's his baby, and he loves it to bits. But what this machine does is this shows you how essentially the wool takes up moisture from different humidities within a room, so different relative humidities. And so we did this for several types of wool, and we saw that again, each wool was unique in how it took up water. And this started to fascinate us. What was even more fascinating is that as the wool gave out water, so as the atmosphere got drier and it started to give out water, then once again there was a difference between the different types of wool to how quickly they gave out water. Importantly, there was also a difference, as you can see in these graphs, between how quickly the wool took up water and how quickly it gave it away. So there was a gap. So if your room was at let's say 60% relative humidity, and as most houses are in the UK these days, and if it was getting drier, the wool would hold on to more water than it would if it was getting wetter. So that was really fascinating, and understanding this let us understand how you could use wool to make a room feel more comfortable. Then maybe I should say Simon, had a great idea. And he thought, what about wool holding on to other things? And this started a whole 4-year project into looking at how wool could take up chemicals in the atmosphere within the home, and how it could make us feel better. So the first chemical we went on to look at was formaldehyde. Formaldehyde, you know, is a toxic substance, and it comes out of all our furniture because all our furniture is made of MDF, and oh, it's terrible, it's terrible. Well, actually, these days, the most formaldehyde in your room will actually come out of your breath, or maybe the bowl of tomatoes sat on your sideboard. But nevertheless, we once again found out that wool would take up formaldehyde in a high concentration and hold on to it. What was special with formaldehyde was that it held on to it and then released some of the formaldehyde it was holding on to when concentrations were low in the atmosphere, but it would also hold on to some formaldehyde permanently. So it would chemically bond some of the formaldehyde from the atmosphere to itself. And so that would work to make the atmosphere and our environment much better for our health. Once again, we had to try different types of wool, and we did. And as you can see from the blue graph at the bottom of the screen there, different types of wool absorbed different amounts of formaldehyde. Again, with blackface and grey swaledale taking up much more than some of the other types of wool. So then again, we moved on with our research. We thought, right, we've done formaldehyde, what next? Well, we'll look at different VOCs in the atmosphere. So toluene, limonene, the smell of lemons, you know, you get that from air fresheners a lot, but too much of it can be very unpleasant. Dodecane. So these were 3 model VOCs that we took up. Once again, we tried and looked at how different species of sheep, the wool from species of sheep would take up. And you can see again from this graph that different species took up different amounts of VOCs at different rates. And indeed, certainly with the Swaledale, and specifically the unscoured Swaledale, so this is very, very raw wool, that absorbed everything. And we could keep pumping in more of these VOCs and it keep absorbing it. So there's an interesting thing with lanolin there and how lanolin helps to absorb the VOCs. And you'll see that if you do want any further details of these, I'm sure get in contact, and there's some great papers out there that my colleagues and some of my PhD students have undertaken. So of course we know that wool has this great property around fire resistance, and that actually you need a lot of oxygen in the area of the fire for wool to burn at all. The ignition temperature is higher than many textile fibers that we use, and importantly for wool is it doesn't melt. So you don't get a dripping effect as you do with some of the synthetic fibers. Now this is important for clothing and for carpets and furnishing textiles. As you can see there, we have a firefighter dressed in a wool suit, which was deemed, I think that's in Italy, where they use wool suits. And even our own firefighters use wool wadding in their fire jackets. But this gives some very interesting properties to the products that you can build from wool. So when we start talking about composites, we can start talking about fire retardant composites. And that's important. That's something to keep in your mind for when we come on to that. So we've kind of been talking about wool as a solid material, and we'll go back very quickly to talk about that in just in a minute. But there is something else we can do with wool, and we can degrade wool into its constituent parts. So importantly, you can take a wool particle and pull out the keratin, and that keratin can then be used in biomedical applications. So for scaffolds for bone replacements and for membranes in the body, it can be used to produce films for certain applications, and then hydrogels, which are used in many chemical applications. The wool particles can be used as a biosolvent. I've already talked about VOCs, but there's metal ions that the wool particles and wool fibers can absorb, and these can be used for cleaning up spills and remediation of land. Again, dyes quite obviously can be mopped up by some of these bioabsorbent applications. But even if you've got very bad wool, or dare I say the scrapings from a wool factory floor, there still has an application in their purification and the production of bio-based materials. And another of my colleagues, Radek Braganza, is working on how to pull keratin out of wool in a very environmentally friendly way, and that's something that's ongoing at the moment. But this is chemistry, and this isn't really my my field. Composites is my field, and we do have products already being made from wool in a composite application. But these are immensely expensive products. They're one-off, they're hand-laid up products. You may know Solid Wool and Solid Wool furniture. I wish I could afford one of their chairs, but I certainly can't. And for those of you that are a little bit adventurous, the the top pictures some wool-based surfboards which are produced in New Zealand. Again, I wouldn't even like to think what the cost of those surfboards would be. But where I'm interested in composites is using these intrinsic properties that the composites have. And Gareth mentioned that British Wool are working with universities, and at the moment we're starting to, some of Gareth's colleagues and I are starting to put a project together around this idea of using wool in a more mainstream application where the unique properties of wool are important, and that includes, and essentially for both these applications, so on your left as you're looking at the screen, you have oil transfer piping, and on your right you have what are the luggage carriers for Boeing 747s. That's important because people are starting to put lithium-ion batteries in their hold luggage. And if one of those batteries is to get pierced at the moment, the fire suppression system in a Boeing 747 will not be able to contain the fire that is created from that battery being punctured. With the fire retardant properties containing that fire of a wool composite, there is the potential there to be able to contain that fire long enough for it to be suppressed properly. But these are just two of many applications we're thinking about. But these are applications which could take very, very low value wool and use that low value wool into safety critical applications, which would then certainly push the value of that low quality wool up. The problem the UK may have is that there may not be enough wool, because both of these applications demand a lot of wool, and there's many other applications to do there. It takes a leap of faith, and it will take a business to start, but certainly British Wool and some of the work we've already done has shown that there is that potential there. So just to summarise, non-textile applications of wool at the moment is very niche. You know, you're looking at about £7 a square metre for sheep's wool insulation, compared to sub £1 for mineral wool. So, solid wood composite chairs at around £350 and going up at the moment. But industrial applications will lead to a sustained demand for wool and an increased demand for low quality wool. And that in turn will push the wool price for those low quality wools. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Graham. Another breathtaking presentation, really taking us to all kinds of directions and opening our minds to what can be done with wool. We've had an hour there of being fed with latest information, ideas. It's really, really glad to have all three of you here. So before I open the floor to questions, I just want to set the scene with the questions, and I'll do that a bit of that in Welsh. So cyn I ni rhoi'r cwestiynau o flaen y panel, so just licio wrach amlygu un neu ddau o bethau. Da ni lwcus yno mae gyda ni banel o arbenigwyr fel da ni eisoes wedi cael blas ohono fo dros yr awr dwytha. Mae'r profiad a'r arbenigaeth sydd gan y tri yma yn heb i ail. Felly, os da chi gofyn cwestiynau, jyst cymwch yna ystyried. Fyswn ni wrth y modd gweld cwestiynau agorad sy'n mynd i wneud y mwyaf o arbenigedd y tri yma. Os gynnach chi gwestiynau penodol specifig i'ch busnes chi, efallai fyswn ni'n hoffi gweld chi'n gofyn hwnna unai ar y chat yn benodol i'r arbenigwr perthnasol, neu wrach dilyn fyny y sgwrs efo un o'r tri. Mae'r tri wedi rhannu eu manylion cyswllt. Os da chi heb i gymryd o, mi wneith Elin rannu manylion cyswllt, ac ddim problem o gwbl. Felly, os gawn ni cwestiynau agorad mwyn helpu ni ar gyfer y sesiwn wythnos nesaf, achos mi fyddwn ni'n treulio amser yn pedwerydd ar webinar ola i ddod i fyny efo syniadau falle i bilota. Mi rwy'n wneud bob dim da ni isio, ond da ni isio trio wrach yn y webinar nesaf trio pennu y syniadau agorad. Felly, defnyddiwch y cyfle yma i holi cwestiynau. Rwy'ch chi'n gwneud o ar y chat, neu rwy'ch chi'n rhoi eich llaw i fyny Neu ddefnyddiwch yr icon bach yma fel sy'n dangos fyny ar y sgrin gen i fe hyn i dynnu fy sylw i. A wedyn nodyn bach i'r panelwyr, os fysa chi gallu matab yn gryno ag i'r pwynt fysa hynny'n caniatáu i wneud y gorau o'r amser. Dwi wrth gwrs yn mynd i adael i hwn lifo mwy na hanner awr wedi 8, achos dwi wedi'r cyfle yma ddim yn codi'n aml. Dwi'n siŵr fydd Elin yn hapus i ni ymestyn y sesiwn tu hwnt i hanner wedi 8, ac yn ei weld wrach yr byntiau chwarter i yma wrach oedd ni'n Eli i gloi, ac yn ei weld sydd eithi. Felly, pwy sydd efo'r cwestiwn cyntaf neu'r sylwad cyntaf?
Wel,
Efo Hugh gyntaf. Diolch yn fawr i chi Hugh. Ydych chi'n gofyn eich cwestiwn, sylwch dda?
ga i ofyn cwestiwn i'r gwrthbanheddig o Prifysgol Bangor. Dwi'n meddwl oedd hi'n galonogol iawn gwrando ar ei gyflwyniad o, ac yn sicr yn dod â dimensiwn newydd i'r defnydd o wlan. Fysa gynno fo ryw syniad pa mor fuan y bysan ni'n gweld datblygiadau mae di ddangos yn dod i fodolaeth a pryd bysan nhw'n debygol o gael dylanwad ar y farchnad wlan efo'r bwriad bod nhw'n codi'r pris i'r cynnyrchwr wrth reswm.
Diolch yn fawr Hugh. Diolch o galon. Drosodd i chdi Graham.
So how quickly could we get something to market? There are already products in market, as I said, but they are very expensive. One of the issues we have, and insulation is the prime example, that if we had more people producing it, then we could get more wool into wool insulation, but have it cheaper to the consumer. So there's a little bit of a chicken and an egg issue. As for the more composite applications, we're looking at probably a year to 2 years research program. But then again, it's how quickly that's taken up by business, and that's kind of where we are with things in the timber industry and the wool industry as well. That's the usual time frame.
Diolch yn fawr, thank you Graham. Diolch yn fawr. Y cwestiwn nesaf, groeso chi postio'ch cwestiwn ar y chat, a mi drio gwneud cyfiawnder o'r cwestiwn. You're welcome to put your question at the chat. Or you can ask direct to the panel by putting a hand up or put your virtual hand up.
Geraint, lla i ofyn cwestiwn?
Diolch. Na ddrwg yn o'n i'n oedi Aled, o'n i ddim yn gweld chi ewch ymlaen i ofyn cwestiwn gan. Diolch yn fawr Aled.
Yeah. I asked the same question to last week's speakers likewise, and I'll ask them it again today. Does the adoption of the use of these natural fibres require incentivisation from government?
Diolch yn fawr Aled. Rhoi gyfle, I'll give you the opportunity to, very briefly, if the three of you might want to maybe share your response to that question from Aled. Courtney, would you like to go first?
Can you just repeat the question, because my translation spoke over it.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
I asked the same question last week to the speakers. In the panel's opinion, does the adoption of natural fibre like wool require incentivisation of government?
I mean, I think it's not a bad thing if the government does provide incentives. I mean, that's always going to be a driver. But, I mean, who knows? I mean, at the moment with, we are living through some very, very unusual times. So, I mean, only time will tell if government incentives will come. I mean, does the government even understand the industry, really? I mean, that would be my big question. I mean, who's in the government who can sit down and look at the industry and look at where the incentives could come, what kind of incentives they could offer. You know, COVID-19 is obviously going to bring a huge distraction for the next 12 months. But I mean, I think, you know, any incentives are obviously certainly a good thing, but I mean, it's a very difficult question to answer, really. I mean,
if the whole issue of microplastics in the environment is so damaging, I would think really, if people are serious in addressing the issue, then that something has to be done at a government level.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I mean, I was watching a programme, it was a while ago now, I can't remember the name of the programme, but they were having an interview with this lady who was advocating vegan fashion. And the interviewer asked the lady, what should people be looking for in clothing labels? And the first thing that she said was natural fibres, avoid natural fibres. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was like, how can you discourage the use of natural fibres and then on the other hand advocate the use of synthetics? Because she then went on to say we should be looking at synthetics. I just couldn't understand. I just thought it was crazy. But yeah, that I mean, what's happening? That's the message. I think it will happen very, very slowly. But like I say, I mean, obviously I don't know what conversations are being had in government, but yes, I agree. I think it has to come from a higher level.
Thank you, Courtney. And Graham, and then Gareth. Any thoughts in response to Alet's question?
Yes. So there is some incentive already there. That Net Zero 2050 incentivizes the use of carbon negative materials, and wool can. Wool is pretty much carbon negative in terms of a long-lasting material. Certainly when used in clothing applications or in some of the applications I've talked about. And so there is some incentive already there. The problem we've got at the moment is that government and people enacting the carbon accounting and the carbon accounting for each subsequent years are still looking at the low-hanging fruit. So they will take mineral wool or glass wool insulation and put that in a house for free because that creates a warmer house. Therefore, that house uses less energy to heat that house. What they don't look is the amount of energy that's gone into producing that product. And so there will come a point where we've literally taken all the low-hanging fruit, and we'll get to the carbon accounts maybe in 2025, 2030, where we can't do that anymore, and we're looking for how do we create carbon neutral homes. And the only way to do that is to use natural materials in every possible place, and that includes things like the insulation, the plastics that are used, be bioplastics with the appropriate fillers, where wool is one of those options. So there is some there. I don't think there's enough incentive, but I think we will see it come.
Diolch, Graham. I wonder if the carbon situation is different between lowland and upland systems. So that'd be something interesting to learn a bit more. And then Gareth?
Yeah, as I mentioned in the presentation, we have been lobbying the politicians this year because of the situation we find ourselves in, but we are trying to use it as a way to raise awareness, because as Courtney said, you know, how many other politicians are aware, obviously, of the sector, the challenges we face. But it's very much as Courtney and Graham were saying, you know, we've all got these targets and carbon and climate change and so on, and because of the natural characteristics and benefits of wool, then the lobbying that we're doing, you know, there could well be some incentives. You know, we've talked about the insulation. You know, here in Denby, you know, there's a significant sort of development of houses on the outskirts of Denby here and things. You know, could there be some sort of incentive on the wool insulation that a certain percentage of new builds needs to be insulated by wool, for example. So these are lots of things that we're discussing in Cardiff, as well as Westminster and Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. But it does seem to be a little bit of a slow burner, because obviously, you know, there's lots of other things going on at the moment as a result of the pandemic, and there's lots of other sectors and industries who are finding it challenging as well.
Diolch o galon, diolch o Gareth, a diolch Aled am y cwestiwn. Continue to share. Thank you, Mike, for your comments on the chat. Keep them coming. A diolch Elin a rannu manylion siaradwyr heno yma ar y chat. Felly os gan rhywun gwestiwn arall, na i atgoffa chi eto, mae'r cefndir y gyfres yma webinara wedi godod bobl at ei gilydd gan gyrraedd y pen llanw nos Lun nesaf, lle fyddwn ni'n trio amlygu syniadau bydd efalla y modd i arloesi Gwynedd wledig, ac hefyd arloesi Môn i gefnogi drwy eu pilota yma yn yr ardal. Felly, os yna rhyw gwestiwn arall, sa'ch chi'n licio holi panel. Hyw, ewch chi ymlaen efo'ch ail gwestiwn.
Wel, diolch yn gwestiwn, dweud y gwir, dwi jyst yn gwneud sylw yn dilyn wan o sylwadau Graham, falle bod dyfodol hir dymor yn falle mynd i fod yn llewyrchus ar gyfer Gwlan, ond mae'r blwyddyn a hanner nesaf yn mynd i fod yn heriol tu hwnt i bob un cwmni sy'n ymwneud efo Gwlan, achos da ni'n llythrenol hefo gormod o wlân ar gael ar y farchnad byd-eang, a does e ddim digon o alw amdano fo. Mae'n gyfnod lle mae Gwlan Prydeinig yn y cyfnod mwyaf heriol mae o wedi weld yn ei 70 mlynedd o fodolaeth, dweud y gwir. Mae'n braf clywed yn negeseuon positif i godi'n clona ni, ond mae'r blwyddyn a hanner nesaf yn mynd i fod yn heriol tu hwnt.
Neu wir, ac os oedd rhywun gwrando ar y teledu ddoe, ar sylwadau Mr George Eustace, wrth gwrs, os oes rhywun mewn amheuaeth am beth sydd yn blaenau ni, mae wedi cael ei gadarnhau bellach, wrth gwrs, ar heriau sy'n mynd i ddigwydd. Ond nawn ni osgoi mynd ar rhy wleidyddol, achos fel mae'r siaradwr wedi dweud, mae hwnnw tu allan i'n dwylo ni yn uniongyrchol, wrth gwrs, am modd i ni lobio drwy cyrff eraill, ond efallai, os na i annog i ni ganolbwyntio ar be fydda modd i ni ganolbwyntio arno fo a roed i amser i ddatblygu cyfleon neu gwerth ychwanegol, yna dyna swn i'n groesawu i weld ni'n defnyddio amser yr panelwyr os o bosib. Os yw'n eisiau annog, os o'r rei wrach bron tra gofyn cwestiwn, wch ymlaen i ofyn cwestiwn. Dwi'n siarad cadw llygad, mae pawb i weld ar y sgrin o'mlaen i. Mae rhywbeth eitha cymdeithasol, jyst bio bawb, di gwir.
I was going to say that I thought we were finishing at 8:30, so I was holding back any potential enthusiasm about questions.
I'll just say, if anybody wants to email me, that's fine as well. I think my email address has been shared in the chat.
Yeah.
Yes, I've got Courtney's information, and I've made a note. But I would say it's another week that's taken a different direction. I think the Graham's discussion about breaking the fibre down to its molecular level is of particular interest. And I've been concerned because there's been a lot of discussion on Australian radio about the fact that sheep are considered non-vegan and the world's going vegan. And so I was comparing it with silk, and silk is also considered non-vegan because it comes from an animal, albeit something we don't consider the same as a sheep, or at least I don't, or haven't done in the past. So I'm being educated by that. But the Australians obviously particularly concerned because they are so invested in sheep. I mean, we are in Britain, but we're not getting a lot of money out of it, whereas they earn a good amount of revenue out of both the meat and the fleece. So the area that I am interested in is this idea of mixing together the molecular level. So just as we could eat an impossible burger that tastes like meat but isn't meat and has a lot of the characteristics of meat, and potentially we also have the opportunity to be able to move the sheep population to being able to do a lot more useful role with a lot less perhaps resistance from those that are anti-animal.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. Thank you for those thoughts, Mike, and good to see you again. I hope you'll be able to attend next week's session as well, where we'll be looking at sort of formulating some ideas. I'll be asking that question directly to the panel, but I think Aled was going to come in possibly with a comment or a question. Aled?
Well, it was on the same lines as that again, really, regarding the medical uses of the breakdown materials that you can make out of wool. And that was a very interesting subject that Graham presented to us. And I was just wondering how progressed is that field of work presently?
There's certainly academic activity in this area. I'm not able to give you a timescale to how quickly we will see product on the market or within the hospitals, because of course it goes through, anything that goes into medical applications goes through a lot more rigorous testing than a composite pipe. That's for sure. But it is being done, and it has been done both here in Bangor, as well as the astute of you may have noticed the graph I used on that slide was from a paper from China, from a very bizarrely a lab in Wuhan, which made me decide I'm not going there this year. But so the Chinese are working on this, and we're working on it here in Bangor as well. As for time to market, probably for medical, you're looking 5 years.
Graham, thank you. Well, I'll bring things so close then with the final. I'll take a little bit of asking the question myself. Knowing that the background to this series of webinars, Courtney, Graham and Gareth, is to try and identify possible pilots that the leader funding can support. So these are relatively small pilots that wouldn't be commercially viable on its own, or would be deemed too risky for someone to do it on their own. Have you got any ideas maybe you'd like to float, and then maybe some of these ideas some of the listeners and people within the group might want to pick up next week? So I'm setting a bit of a challenge at the end there, maybe for you to flag up 1 or 2 ideas you would think would be worth putting into the pot, so for us to maybe consider for next week. And then in the meantime, Tarian Meyer has asked you, Graham, if you could share your email address on the chat as well. So maybe in reverse to the last time, maybe Gareth, you want to start maybe with 1 or 2 ideas, and you can tell me off afterwards for giving you such a nasty question.
Yeah. No, it's I'm not sure. There's a chap called Elved. I think he might have been on your webinar last week. I've had a couple of conversations with Elved. He's got some ideas around compost and wool insulation. The other thing, just to reiterate, what I said in the presentation, really, and I know this is not answering the question, it's sort of passing the buck a little bit. But there's this group. I'm not sure if Gwen Davis, that's in the webinar this evening, but there's a Gwen Davis that leads an agri-scop group that's been set up for wool as well as the Welsh wool and textile. But my details are there. Come and talk to us, and any ideas, let's explore them together. Like I said, we're quite unique. We've got contacts within the wool supply chain. We can talk about the wool types and things, you know, and Graham and Courtney have talked about. There's a huge opportunity and range there of different things that can be used or whatever. So, like I said, I'm not giving much inspiration in terms of new ideas or projects, but like I said, if anyone gets any inspiration, by all means share it with us, and we're more than happy to work with them and help in any way that we can.
Diolch o galon, Gareth. Diolch yn fawr. Mae'r drws y sicr yr agor i gydweithio gyda chi. Diolch yn fawr.
Yeah.
Graham?
So I guess potential ideas and projects. I guess what I'd put out there is so the wool we've got in the area is getting to understand that wool not from a textile point of view, so from a potential materials point of view. Again, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, that understanding of how it can be used in composite fundamentally comes down to a different set of data that you need for that wool. And I guess what I would put out there is you know, be the first guys in the UK to understand your wool for that. So when someone decides to set up a wool composite production facility, whether it be large or small, they're going to say, actually, those guys in Gwynedd know what their wool is. They know the data we need. Let's go and set up our factory there.
Interesting. Thank you, Graham. And lastly, Courtney?
It's a great question. I mean, I suppose I haven't got any real ideas as such, but I did read about wool being used to make face masks, and seeing as though everyone's talking about COVID-19 and it's with us, or definitely going to be with us for the next 12 months, is there a potential use for it there? I mean, I know that that's going to take time again. It's not something that you're going to be able to just produce like that. But medical uses, I mean, we've already discussed it, but insulation, wool insulation, it seems to be that things are moving in that direction, using natural products in the construction industry. I think the one thing I would say is open and dialogue. I mean, this one might already be being done, I'm not too sure, but open and dialogue, you know, with the big producers, you know, like Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and seeing, you know, what kind of incentives they have there, and if they can contribute to the industry in any way.
Yeah, great. Some 3 different thoughts there, and all, you know, very applicable for the challenge we've got on our hands. So felly, diolch o galon I Graham a Courtney a Gareth am ymuno efo ni. Mae safon y drafodaeth a'r cyflwyniad da ni wedi cael wedi bod yn uchel iawn heno yma, ac fydd anodd switcho'r meddwl I ffwrdd I fynd I gysgu. Mi falle neu gyfri defaid, efo Gwlan I ddim, dwi'n yn siŵr, ond byddai'n stydio Gwlan wrth neidio fy meddwl mwy na thebyg. Diolch o galon I chi, ac hefyd am fod mor barod I ddilyn fyny'r sgwrs. Da chi wedi rhannu'ch cyfeiriad e-bost. Dwi'n ymwybodol yn y grŵp yma, mae yna bobl o Wynedd, Môn a Thu Hwnt yn ymuno efo ni, ac efallai fydd yna links defnyddiol yn cael ei ffurfio heno yma fel da ni siarad. Ac wrth gwrs, dwi'n gwybod fod arloesi Gwynedd wledig ac arloesi Môn isio gwneud y math yna beth o adeiladu pontydd. Mi fyddwn ni hefyd yn annog, os gwelwch o dda, I rai pawb heno yma, os bosib I wneud ymdrech arbennig i'r webinar ola, achos dyna lle mae'r gwaith calad efallai yn mynd I fod I gael ei wneud gan bawb ohona ni, achos mae'r gwahoddiad yn un wirioneddol gan arloesi. Mae Elin yma o arloesi Gwynedd wledig, mae Dafydd Griffith yma heno hefyd, mae o'n Reolwr Gyfarwyddwr Menter Môn sy'n gyfrifol am y rhaglenni yn yr ardal, mae'n codi law y fanna, ac hefyd mae gennym ni aelodau o'r lag hefyd yn ymysg yn ogystal â ffermwyr, ac hefyd bobl sy'n defnyddio gwlan ac bob math o ddiddordebau eraill. Felly dowch ynghyd nos Lun nesa. Mi fyddwn ni hefyd yn awyddus I gynnal cysylltiad. Oedd Gareth yn sôn am Gwen, a dwi'n eitha siŵr mae'r Gwen yn ti'n yma Gareth sydd yn ymuno efo ni, a fydd Elin yn gyfrifol am cadw'r cysylltiadau efo'r grwpiau yma I gyd. Felly diolch o galon I chi gyd am ymuno, a gobeithio fyddwch chi'n gallu ymuno efo ni am y sesiwn ola nos Lun nesa, a nerwch chi drosodd rwan I Elin I gau bethau'n ffurfiol am heno yma.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Negas tebyg iawn i be sgyn Geraint, really. Diolch yn fawr iawn i Geraint fel bob wsos am drefnu a cyflwyno hynna. A diolch yn fawr iawn i Graham, Courtney a Gareth am siarad hynno. Dwi'n meddwl bod fi'n deud hyn bob wsos, ond dwi'n dysgu mwy bob wsos a swn i yn licio sy'n gennym ni fwy amser. So, dwi'n siŵr bod gennym ni ddigon o bethau drafod bob nos lun am fisoedd. Ond gobeithio bod pawb di mwynhau a diolch i chi am fynychu. A fatha idodd Geraint, dwi'n gobeithio fedrwch chi fynychu wsos nesaf fod ar rhan o'r sgwrs efo be nawn ni nesaf chi. Di'r manylion ddim fyny eto ar Eventbrite am mi fydd o, a mae genna fi manylion cyswllt bawb sydd wedi cyfrestru, so mi fyddai mewn cyswllt dros y dynodion nesaf o manylion chi. Ond am 7 o gloch eto nos lun nesaf fydd o. Felly, diolch yn fawr iawn, a nos dawch.